first webinar in our webinar series from the EQUAL-IST project. My name is Maria Sangiuliano. I am a research fellow at the Università Foscari in Venice, Department of Computer Sciences, we are in charge of supporting all actions related to gender equality plans, design and implementation in our 7 research organizations, which, as you might know, are all IST and ICT departments. And we organized our first webinar at a moment in time where all our research organizations as partners have concluded their design phase after a thorough internal assessment through participatory gender audit and complemented by a crowdsourcing exercise via a dedicated platform that we created. They have now finalized the design and approval of their gender equality plans and are starting the implementation phase. So these webinars are mainly learning opportunities for our partners, but we decided to open them up to external stakeholders and interested organizations and even individuals, because we thought that it would be interesting to do so in any case. Welcome again. I would ask my colleagues from VILabs, which is our coordinating partner, if they would like to briefly say something, or and in case to complement what I just said, and in case and also if they could please give me the presenter role so that you can visualize my screen, and we can just go through very shortly our agenda for today. Okay, thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. We decided to focus our first webinar on the topic of gender-sensitive communication, because basically it's one issue which is addressed in all the gender equality plans from our partner organizations. It's really a cross-cutting topic, and all our gender equality plans are including some actions on this issue. So it was a very easy pickup in terms of topics to be addressed for a very first webinar. And today we are going to go through this issue. First, I will give the floor to Professor Giuliana Giusti from Foscari University, the Department of Linguistics Studies, who is actually the key expert and our keynote speaker with extensive expertise, research expertise on gender and language issues. So her presentation will dig into gender and language issues mainly, but not only, as you will see. Then it will be my turn to guide you through some of the existing available tools for promoting gender-sensitive communication. This will be really a sort of hands-on presentation, providing very practical hints and some indicators which have been proposed by UNESCO, UNDP, and other stakeholders on these issues. And then we will continue with a question and answer and knowledge sharing session, where we will try to give the floor to whoever would like to comment And I would invite you in any case to type any questions or comments in the chat section that we have here in our GoToMeeting facility. I'm not sure whether you are familiar with this tool, but I was not supposed to start my webcam because otherwise we risk to not to support the presentation. Sorry, but then you can just to take the floor. You just need to activate and deactivate the microphone icon so that it will become green. While I invite everybody to keep it in deactivated during the presentations. Can you also see the video now? I guess you should. And if it works together with the screen sharing, we should be okay. Okay, so I just yeah. Let me see. Now, okay. It's now suspended. Okay. I just give the floor to Giuliana Giusti for her keynote now. And please, Vasia, just confirm that you can see again the screen, that we don't have any issues with this.
Yes, we can see the screen. There are no issues.
Okay.
You can proceed. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay. I have a long PowerPoint, which I used to give for this Ponti project, for this Pari Opportunità project that was run by the University of Venice some years ago. But we will go through it in the 20 minutes I have, and then we will stop wherever I stop. And if you have more questions, you can ask them, or you can write me later on. So the first thing I want to talk about is just give a look at this picture. This was the picture that had been chosen for the Ponti project, a project that was for equal opportunities between men and women. But look at the picture, in a very naive way. The person who chose the picture, I think, chose it very badly, because it's not a symmetric picture. The man and the woman, first of all, are very elegant and very, economic, business-like.
Excuse me, I don't see the picture. Have you shared your screen?
I didn't. Okay, share the screen.
No, it should be already shared. Oh.
No, I cannot see it.
Oh, really? Okay. And what about now?
Let's wait some seconds.
Not really, Maria. Can you please? Oh, now we can see it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Good, great. Okay, so you see, there is a man that is probably telling the woman something, and the woman is very interested, looking very carefully at what he is proposing. Okay, so this was the first thing I told. The picture had already been chosen, so I was mad at the personnel. I said, what the hell do you think this shows? I mean, these are not two equal people. But this was, in a sense, what they were figuring out that they wanted to reach when they were talking to high school students. Women should become like this woman, which I found terrible, especially because it was done in good faith. Okay. So this is the point. Language is also something very that we use very unconsciously, especially the little parts of language that are functional, like gender declension in nouns. In those languages, such as Italian, in Italian, in German, in Ukrainian, you know, we have gender declension, which is part of the system, but we don't use it in a rational way, because we have learned it when we were less than 2, okay? And we have learned it without learning a grammar. So I will talk about these things, these little things that regard language. Okay, sexism is discrimination by sex, and and everybody knows this in your group. So can a language be sexist? Well, for example, in a very quick look at honorifics in Italian and English. In Italian, we often have signora and signorina, you know, 2 terms that are used in the same context, namely when we address a person or when we don't know the person and we want to somehow show courtesy or respect. Signora and signorina is parallel to Mrs. and Miss. So it addresses a woman in a different way according to marital status. In Italian, at least, also according to age. So old women are often called signora. And there is a terrible situation for women who are around 30, because they start being addressed signora and they think, oh my God, I look old. And you see, this is not the case for men. Men are never addressed as signorino. Signorino only occurs in literature, usually for the boy who is the son of rich people who have servants. Okay. English has gone one step further with respect to Italian. In the 70s, a term has been coined as Ms. We should be neutral between Mrs. and Miss. Signora in Italian could be used without, you know, parallel to signore, since, again, we have a very regular declension. Everything that ends with ore should end with ora if it refers to a woman. So signorina could, for example, be totally abandoned, even for students, in a gender, in a symmetric gender use. Or you don't use signore. In fact, signore is much less used in Italian. Okay, can language be discriminating? There are 2 general ways to look at language, and this can be addressed in linguistic theory by structuralism, dating back to Saussure's idea that there is an arbitrary relationship between form, namely what you say, and meaning, namely what you refer to with what you say. So one could say that, you know, sometimes the form is not necessarily sexist. It's just it's arbitrarily indicated to mean something. But people who say this don't keep in mind that the meaning can be sexist. Okay, so using that form is related to that meaning in an irrational, or at least non-rational way. People are not aware of this, and that meaning can be sexist. I will discuss this. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis says that language can shape thought. I don't believe this. Usually it is thought that shapes language, and the sexist use of the language, in fact, shapes the language to a sexist use and reinforces sexist stereotypes. And I will give you lots of examples, because this is very theoretical and you may find it quite obscure. Okay, so I will give examples on how we refer to generic human beings in English and Italian, how we name job titles, what the different grammars of English and Italian are, because they are very different, and therefore this empowerment issue of language use should be treated differently according to the different systems. And then we may not have time to look at stereotype metaphors and language change, but it is in the PowerPoint that will be available. Okay, honorifics, Madam, Sir, or Doctor, Professors. Okay, job names and then, okay. Women are, in Italian at least, women are often addressed as signora, no matters what their job title, professional title, or academic title is. So, c'è una signora al telefono, parlo con la signora Maria. Often women are referred to as first names, even with the honorific. Signora, scusi signora to a stranger all the time. Then we can have metaphors like la signora di Mari, and we often say signora for wife. Porti, bring your wife, porti la sua signora. Okay, there is a sort of an extra used of signora in Italian, which is done almost for all purposes. Okay, and this often makes the woman's role, if it is a prominent role, disappear. It is interesting, and this is important for those when you translate, that signora has very many different translations in English. For example, in one, you refer to a woman, you can say lady, but you often say a woman now in modern English. When you refer to somebody with just the proper name, you don't use signora or madam or lady or anything in English. You use madam and not lady when you use it as an allocution. There are metaphors, you know, fixed expressions like the mistress of the sea, and again, wife is wife and cannot be signora in English. So this overuse of signora makes signora a term that is almost becoming sexist. Okay, and I will skip one slide. My point is, which I have already made, women are addressed more often than men by their first names, with or without signora. You don't often say il signor Mario. You often say il signor with its last name. For example, il signor Rossi. Are there any Italians in the group? Yes. Okay, so this may be interesting. But for men, we often even invent job titles or academic titles. So if we don't know whether that person has a degree or not, we can say geometra, ingegnere, dottore, very, very, very often. And I think it is an experience that academic women have had, that they are called just signora, while young researchers or collaborators are often called professor, if they are men. In Italian, and this is one thing that I've made sort of my own vocation, you know, been trying to convince Italians that Italian has a symmetric system of gender. So we always have masculine and feminine, and these are used, in fact, for certain jobs. So we would never use maestro for an elementary school teacher if it is a woman. Okay, so maestro is ambiguous between the great orchestra directors, Maestro Muti, Maestro Abbado, and very normal male school teachers. But maestra, unfortunately, is only used for school teachers. So the difference is not in the form, the difference is in the meaning. In Italian, it is somehow the glass ceiling for certain feminine nouns is more strong, and it's a cultural glass ceiling because the system perfectly has it. So I have here the second block of nouns are nouns with a form in like a past participle, presidente, or an adjective, vigile, or a past, so present participle, presidente, an adjective, vigile, a past participle, soldato, and the past participle, avvocato. And what I'm giving as the feminine is a feminine that should not be used with an ending in esta, which is useless, because these forms, presidente, vigile, have a form that can be masculine and feminine. La presidente, la vigile, il presidente, il vigile. And the past participle forms like soldato or avvocato are like every past participle can have an ending with a, which is a feminine, like soldata and avvocata. Okay, and this is the same for casalinga, lavandaia, bambinaia. It's an ending in a, which is obviously present for jobs that are in the cultural use typical of women. Now, nouns like assessore, ministro, architetto, and pretore are usually used in the masculine for women. And this has no linguistic reason, it only has a cultural reason, because ministro is exactly the same formation as maestro. So it could be ministra. Assessore is exactly like signore, so it could be assessora. Pretore is exactly like direttore, so it could be pretrice. And architetto is a noun that is on its own, but ending in O, could easily do architetta. And this is what I suggest, and what actually Alma Sabatini suggested in the late 1980s for Italian, and what a colleague of University of Modena and Reggio, I don't know what department she is, but she is a collaborator of the Accademia della Crusca, and she has guidelines for a modern use of non-sexist use of Italian, Cecilia Robustelli. So job titles in English, and here we see the differences between Italian and English. English is a language in which gender is only present in pronouns. So we only have she, her, he, him, his, her, okay? So we don't have gender on nouns or on adjectives. It's rather the opposite of Italian, where gender is all over the place, on past participles, on adjectives, on articles, everywhere. In English, nouns don't have gender. The only nouns that have gender are the ones that you find on the left column, and these are compound nouns. Compound nouns are nouns compounded with two words. So chairman is formed by man and chair. And of course, a chairman, a feminine of chairman, could be chairwoman. But because many of these jobs don't necessarily have a compound form, the non-sexist use of English recommends just skipping the word man, because we can metaphorically say that a chairperson is the chair of the meeting is the person who chairs the meeting. English has this possibility of having motion between noun, verb, and then again verb and noun. So one could say that the chair of a meeting, moderator, or head of the department, the chair of the department, the head of the department is a person. Okay, there are many other ways, and again, this res, like presidentessa, das s in English, is to be avoided because it derives the feminine from the masculine. So it's not a natural declension, but it takes the basic masculine noun and derives a feminine with an extra suffix, and this is to be avoided both in Italian and in English. Okay. Now, how am I doing with time?
We still have 5 minutes.
Okay. So never use man as human being. Man used to be a human being in Old English. In fact, male was ver, which is very similar to Latin vir, and a male human being was verman in Old English. Wife, vif, was female, and a female human being was vifman. Okay, so man and mensch were similar. Mensch has remained in German, is different from man. Homo in Latin had this function, so of course it was in the masculine gender, but this is not so important. It was because we said form and meaning, you know, the form can be independently related to meaning. Homo was not distinguishing man and woman in Latin, because Latin had vir and mulier, but then look at what happened. Man in English has specialized for the male human, and one can say it is now ambiguous between male human and just human. And the uomo in Italian has also become male human. There is no other way to say male human. Vir has disappeared. Note that vifman, the female human, has become woman. So you see, now it is man and woman is asymmetric in English, used like this. So if we want to say human being and include women, we cannot use unambiguously man, because man can also mean just male. Look at what happened of wif. Wif has become wife, namely the woman, the role of woman related to a man. Mulier, which used to mean woman, is also gone through the same change as wif. It means moglie, wife. And the role of mulier is what has been taken by a development of the word domina. Domina is what? Is signora in Italian, right? It means a woman of a high level, of a high social level. But it's interesting. Everything that regards women goes down. So domina, which meant woman of a high social level, is now woman, just a woman, no social level. And now often we use signora in Italian and lady in English, by the way, to mean just a woman. So the woman who cleans our house is certainly not a woman of a high social level, but we say la signora delle pulizie, the cleaning lady, the same in English. This use of lady has always been sanctioned by non-sexist use of language. Pronominal reference is the issue of English. So when you translate your websites in English and you want to communicate with international students, you have to make just attention to pronouns. What is interesting is that the pronoun for impersonal singular is often masculine, but in non-sexist use is the plural. The plural is not masculine or feminine in English. The third person plural pronouns or possessive adjectives. And this is often somehow criticized by people who don't want to use a non-sexist language. They like the sexist use. It is interesting to know that that this plural for singular, generic plural to include men and women for singular, is not an innovation of crazy feminist linguists. It was used by Shakespeare in the 16th or early 17th century. For example, it is found in literature Lord Chesterfield, who was not a feminist, in the 18th century, and William Caxton in the 16th century, who certainly would not care about including women. So the use of the plural, third person plural in English is rooted in the history of language and cannot be criticized for being a stupid innovation just to include women. Yeah, this is an example of, you know, how the nonsense use of language is often criticized, okay? And we don't have time to do this. A little bit of history. There are lots of, as regards the English language, the 70s are the period in which in the US and then later on in England or in other usage of English, non-sexist language has been proposed. In Italy, it has arrived very, very late, in the late 80s, and it was an initiative of the president of the government, and it has never been really used. I think there has been a little relaunching of this issue in the last 5 years, and I hope I've been also contributing to this. I've been, you know, with many other linguists, we have been, you know, just trying to show that the language, the Italian language, is not sexist. It is the use of it. So here you have some links that you can find for Italian and English, and I think I can stop here because, well, do I have 2 minutes? What is important is when we use metaphors, okay? The woman is not metaphorically a subspecies of man. Often the metaphor is the man is adult, woman is child, and this is often also in visual communication. The idea that man is the creator and the woman is created. The man belongs to the outside world, the woman belongs to the house, and this is very dangerous, for example, in or that caretaking jobs are good for women, while directing jobs are good for men. So man is leader, woman is caretaker, man is strong, woman is weak. All these stereotypes are very strongly rooted in our conception of the world, and often, even in good faith, we use it. And what I often see is that when I give these lectures, usually I give it because I'm invited, and the people who come are people who are in favor of male-female equality, and they get and they are often you know, women in the majority, and they are often offended if I tell them that they should use certain terms that they don't use, or that they should not let people let people call them signora, for example. They say, I like it, and I'm a feminist. And you know, it's something so much deeply rooted in our language use and in our, you know, self recognition, that we get offended for seeing that it's not so equal, it's not so correct. And often there is this kind of resistance from women is due because women don't like to be to find out that what they do is in fact not so, you know, proper. So language change. What I'm proposing is a change in language use. I've shown that language change occurs all the time, and usually words change their meaning. And of course, we can easily change meanings. I'm not proposing a change in the structure of the Italian language, parallel, for example, to what Swedish is doing for the gender neutralized pronoun, which is a human pronoun that doesn't refer to men and women, which refers collectively to men and women. I'm proposing for Italian and for the languages that have the gender system like German and Ukrainian, for example, just to productively declinate or use the productive declension of the language. So to respect the structure of the language and not to go against it, okay? Even if language change is possible, but change the use of language to respect the structure of the language is certainly something that has to be recommended. Language change is possible. Every word that refers to less important or to categories that are socially less powerful or not in power at all, usually change names. And this is all the time. This occurs in, for example, for Black, African American, and now even African American, I think in English is no more politically correct. For migrants, we call, in Italian, we call immigrants, we call them migrants, and we don't realize that that immigrant just means that they've come inside. So it would be less despising than just migrants. And the same for, you know, disabled people. All these languages, all these words can change. They do change. Only jobs, masculine jobs, seem to be difficult to change. So, you know, even words like director, direttore, have a difficulty to decline in the feminine direttrice, because direttrice sounds less powerful. But it's not by using the masculine that we make the woman more powerful. If we use the masculine for the woman, we just say that there is a job that is a job for men, and the woman is there after all by mistake. This is very subliminal. This is very difficult to pinpoint because we use language in a non-rational way. We speak without thinking what the meaning of the language, but not the form. Okay. And then I want to thank you and leave you with what I proposed to the Ponti project, that these are equal opportunity pictures, you know, with men and women on the same level. And let's try to break the glass ceiling also through language.
Thanks a lot, Giuliana, for your thoughtful presentation, and on behalf of the whole consortium also for accepting our invitation to this webinar. So after this great focus on linguistic aspects from Giuliana, the aim of my presentation is actually to broaden a little bit the scope of the topic and deal with gender and communication. And just to highlight, to start highlighting that this is really a very broad research field. It has become a research field. It has also become, we need to say, something which has been discussed a lot in the policy arena at the global level. The women and the gender and communication issue and the gender and media issues. There are organizations and a lot of NGOs working and research centers working on these topics. So communication is including language. It goes beyond language, and it can be seen from multiple angles. This figure here is derived from the structure of the SAGE Handbook on Gender and Communication, which is a comprehensive collection of studies. And it shows how really gender and communication can be looked upon from the organizational side, so the organizational communication and the way institutions and organizations communicate inward and outwards about their own mission and their own processes and working processes. There is mediated communication, and therefore the entire area of medias, from newspapers to paper and digital media, more recently, as well as broadcasting and TV. There is interpersonal communication at the micro level and at the group level. And then as cross-cutting axis, we can refer to intercultural communication, but I would decline it also as intersectionality issues about how gender is interrelated with class, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, and other inequalities, and rhetoric. In the EQUAL-IST project, we deliberately chose to focus only on the two blocks which I highlighted in this slide, and therefore organizational and mediated communication. This doesn't prevent us to take all the rest into account, for sure, but we thought that these were the main areas where structural change, where this topic could be addressed to promote structural change in research institutions. One of our partners from Münster University, who could not join us today, sent us an interesting input, which then drove me to include a preliminary slide on arguing for the importance of gender-sensitive communication in universities and research organizations. So basically, our reflection from our colleague Elena Gorbacheva was referring to the fact that in her experience in promoting gender equality at their university, it seems difficult to other stakeholders and colleagues and staff members, both from the academic and administrative side, to understand why institutional communication is crucial to achieve gender equality in their organization. So here I would like just to go through some of the main arguments that can be used if you might find such a resistance in understanding why this aspect is really important. Well, first of all, as gender is a social-cultural construction, as also Giuliana was showing very well, it's inevitable that gender roles and gender inequalities are conveyed, reflected by language and communication more broadly. Then public image of universities and research institutions is becoming more and more important in the framework both of an increased need for accountability, in particular from public institutions, towards their stakeholders and staff members, and also within the framework of an increased global competition, where gender equality is more and more considered to be a value, both from the side of potential funders and funding institutions, and in the eyes of the potential research talent which each university aims at recruiting, or shall aim at recruiting. For sure, all universities have their own communication offices and dedicated staff to take care of this area. Objective communication then is also an important leverage that can be used as it is really part of the ethical code for all communication and media professionals, and specialists. So it should be recognized that gender-sensitive communication is a more objective type of communication and should be valued for this. Another argument to be leveraged upon can definitely be the fact that gender-sensitive communication has become, as I was already saying, a topic and something which has become the subject of work for a series of multilateral organizations such as UNESCO, UNDP, the Council of Europe, and also professional organizations such as the European Federation of Journalists and consortiums of broadcasters such as COPIAM and many others. There are guidelines which have been produced and disseminated. Some of them we will go through in a while, and therefore it has become a recognized and acknowledged field of policy intervention as well. Back to universities in particular, there's also consistent work done by projects similar to ours, similar to EQUAL-IST, projects on structural changes for gender equality, and in particular the EGIRA consortium has been releasing a charter on gender-sensitive communication, the Antwerp Charter on Gender-Sensitive Communication, which has been then signed upon by many institutions across Europe. So if arguments were missing, we have some to be used now. I'm sure that you could complement for more eventually. And now I would just like to go through the existing guidelines. I've been drawing upon mainly the UNDP gender-sensitive communication guidelines. This is and then the UNESCO gender and media guidelines that I will go through in a while, at least a part of it. The UNDP actually released their gender-sensitive communication guidelines as a part of their certification program named Gender Seal. Every office is actually undergoing this internal certification process, and therefore guidelines were provided on how to mainstream gender across all programmatic areas, and also in gender communication in particular. These hints, which are listed here, are already have been already dealt with by Giuliana in her presentation. It's all related to English, and it's about a gender-sensitive use of forms of address, particular concepts which can be in their meaning refer to male dominance, and also titles and labels and feminine suffixes. Then in the part of the UNDP guidelines which are instead referred to the content of communication, and therefore not the language part, but the content part, there is a lot of overlapping with the UNESCO work on gender and media. And here we can find a lot of interesting indicators on how to achieve a gender-sensitive media coverage and media content. There is a first set of indicators on a balanced presence of women. So here, the strategic objective is seen in terms of achieving a balanced representation of women and media and men in media coverage. And the indicators are a proportion of women and men which are seen, heard, or read about in the news. Those who are in a balanced proportion of women and men interviewed directly or quoted, or used as source of information and opinion, but also the proportion of women and men appearing as experts or spokespersons or ordinary citizens. Because actually here, I mean, it's the overall gender representation which emerges from a certain media content can change dramatically depending on how these indicators are achieved or not. Again, on the same strategic objective of achieving a balanced presence, there's a need to look at how the orientation of men and women is displayed and represented in terms of external or societal orientation of women and men. Who is depicted as having a societal role, and who is depicted as having a home-related role. Also, again, the proportion of women and men and how they are socially positioned across social status and hierarchies. It's important. Obviously, if we have media content which is presenting all men having leading positions and most of the women in home-related roles or care-related roles, this will change a lot. Yeah, and again, also this is also to be checked in relation to thematic areas. If we interview only men on technology, to stick to a topic which is crucial for our project, and we interview only women when the content news is about childcare, then we do not achieve a balanced presence of women and men in media coverage. Again, the percentage of stories focusing centrally on women in particular, it's also to be taken into account as an indicator, and the time-space prominence which is given to stories where women are featured, or women issues are or gender issues are in scope. This can be easily interpreted also in contexts which are scientific or academic contexts, as we could actually find that it would be important to value match in media content released by universities the research results coming from women researchers and professors, and check whether women and men research results are given the same time, space, and prominence into the university's communication. Another indicator which is proposed by UNESCO is the fair portrayal, or the elimination of stereotypes into media content. And here, obviously, we can detect the proportion of stories with stereotypes, the proportion of stories which contain traditionally feminine, masculine roles, and also the proportion of women to men which are portrayed as victims. On the opposite side, it's also interesting to check when and to what extent women are presented and represented as bearers of active agency instead of as victims, as we were saying, and to see to what point there is overall a multidimensional representation and portrayal of women and men. To what extent men, for example, are also represented in their caring roles. And one other relevant area to be screened as an indicator is obviously the presence of purely, let's say, sexist language into media contents. Now that all partners at our consortium are going to deliver their own actions on gender equality, and gender equality plans will be implemented, to what point there will be a media coverage from the university of gender equality plans, for example. This is also another important indicator. To what point media contents are specifically taking care of presenting, conveying, and discussing equality and inequality aspects, and what prominence they acknowledge to these issues. Sorry. There's also need to find evidence of gender consciousness in different types of editorial contents, not only focusing on gender issues specifically. So another indicator here is the percentage of stories which actually show that gender topics are presented into, are tackled into more broader issues, and also the amount of gender disaggregated data that are presented. It seems my presentation doesn't want to continue for some reason, some strange reason. Just 1 second. Okay, and finally, the UNESCO gender and media guidelines. They also present and propose some means of verification of these indicators, because actually at a certain point it's important to understand how to concretely perform the work, a monitoring work in this respect. And what is suggested is definitely sex disaggregated analysis of news and news content, which can be delivered internally, but also by external stakeholders or NGOs or consultants. The content-wise, not only in terms of I mean, qualitative analysis and monitoring of issues and content issues in all news and editorial contents which are delivered is also another means of verification. And an interesting one is in particular the application of the rule of inversion or role reversal, which is useful to show the meaning of gender stereotypes. This is actually a mean of verification which is more suitable to verify the gender balanced representation in media content, and that can be also used as an argument for convincing those who are opposing to a work on gender-sensitive communication. Here I put a couple of nice pictures which show actually the power of inversion, meaning that what would be the impression and the final effect of inverting men and women roles in media representation, but also which would be the effect of inverting social status and ethnicity roles in media representation. Here we find the two first pictures, which are part of a video which was successful a few years ago, and where reversed roles of men and women were presented with a really funny effect when you see I mean, a woman in the typical behavior of making, I mean, some type of sexually harassing comments on a guy who is just parking his bike. It can really make raise a reflection on which is the normal, typical outcome of such a behavior when presented to, when referred to women. And in general, what would be, I couldn't find a picture to display, to showcase the power of inversion in the IST, ICT, computer science fields, but it would be interesting to make this type of exercise and see how pictures of computer sciences environments would look like if we wouldn't find any single man represented in those professional environments. What implementing measures can be taken into consideration by institutions to work on gender-sensitive institutional communication? These are the main building blocks, actually, of the Antwerp Charter on Gender-Sensitive Communication that I was referring a few minutes ago. It works on three main axes: different forms of internal communication, various channels, internal and externals, and different target groups. So in the case of the Antwerp Charter for Gender-Sensitive Communication in Academia, the partners, the signatories are committing to screen and to improve all their written, oral, visual, formal and informal, hierarchical and peer-to-peer communication, addressing all multiple channels of internal and external communications, and there is even a comprehensive list of channels from in content to course materials, email, academic news and websites, brochures, etc., recruitment advertising, conference and poster announcement. This is really showing how working on gender-sensitive institutional communication can really impact on on structural change for gender equality at large. If we manage to, if we start at least to not to have gender bias job announcements, for example, then we obviously contribute to increase the number of female researchers and in STEM or in typically male-dominated sectors, and therefore there is a direct link between because communication is obviously part of all areas, all other areas of intervention, and then a multiplicity of target groups can be addressed by the work on gender-sensitive communication, from staff, from academic staff to the administrative staff, to the students, and also eventually affiliated parties and subcontractors. In particular, let's say advertising and communication agencies, which are subcontracted by research institutions, shall be screened. Some possible actions which can be undertaken. I listed here two main examples from those suggested again by the EGIRA Antwerp Charter, such as guidelines, training courses on gender-sensitive communication, raising awareness for a broader audience, screening of existing materials, departments, mail addresses and web services. I mean, creating a point of reference within a department, like a mail address or a person, a physical person, or a web service, which can work as someone to be addressed for complaints related to biased use of gender, or for making suggestions and proposals. And also achieving a gender-balanced communication team within the dedicated office dealing with institutional communication. And I also wanted to bring the example of a good practice that we have in Italy. Actually, Giuliana has also worked with them at the university, with the University of Ferrara, because I think it's what they did. It's actually can actually be also inspiring for some of our partners. Initially, the university has subscribed to a national level initiative, which was launched by the city of Torino, which was again a charter. The title of the charter sounded similar to I Speak and Do Not Discriminate charter. So the first was this, subscribing to this campaign. Then the rector issued a decree where he prescribed that language use in all university communication channels has to be gender sensitive. Thirdly, a working group was set up to release dedicated guidelines with the collaboration of the Gender Equality Machinery and Committee, and also with the involvement of external scientific consultants. here Giuliana came into play, I think. And finally, and significantly, the Director General of the university was appointed as the person in charge of implementing and monitoring the actual use of the gender-sensitive communication guidelines. So someone at a very high level in the top management structure of the university was given the role of being accountable for implementation and monitoring. So there are really a lot of things that can be done to this point. Several of our partners have included similar actions which are similar to the ones which are listed here. In particular, several of them are going to conduct a screening of existing materials and also raising awareness events, and in some cases there's the aim of releasing guidelines on gender sensitive communication. So this is what I wanted to bring to your attention in terms of existing tools and possible actions to work on this topic. And I would thank you for your attention and just leave the floor to any comments or questions. I didn't check if there were any questions or comments in the chat room. If you just whoever would like to post questions, just activate your audio, clicking on the microphone icon on top of the bar. I would expect, first of all, comments or questions from our EQUAL-IST partners, but also we named this session as question and answers, but also knowledge sharing. So it would be nice to hear from you how you can relate what you listen to what you are starting to implement in your institutions.
May I speak?
Of
Hello,
course.
Maria. Hello. Thank you very much for that. I was listening in because I'm involved in a cross-European project and working not with universities, but with local municipalities. And it's maybe more of a challenge because it's 8 different countries. And of course, using probably 8 different languages. Actually, yeah, 7 different languages. So obviously I don't know those languages, but I don't know if you have any experience or anyone has any experience of working cross-culturally or cross-language.
Yeah, actually, is it Susan speaking?
Yes, it is.
Hi, Susan. Nice to meet you again.
Yes, indeed.
After the Gender ST network. So yeah, we were actually discussing this with Giuliana before when we were preparing the webinar, that this is actually a challenge cross-cultural, cross-linguistic work on these topics, no?
Depends on the cultures. What do you mean cross-culturally? What is the cross-cultural situation?
The different countries are, on the one hand, Denmark, and then on the other, Greece, Italy, but North and South Italy, Portugal, including the Azores, France, Croatia.
So the way of appreciation or depreciation of the language issue is very different in this country. But the structure of the languages, apart from Danish, is not very different. All the, so you mentioned French, Greek, Italian, and then
Portuguese,
Croatian.
Okay, these are all languages that have masculine, feminine for human beings. And well, I was telling Maria, you know, it would have been nice to have a researcher working exactly on this in this project, because we are linguists and we do comparative studies. And so on the one hand, there's the system of the language, which is basically the same, okay? There is human reference usually corresponds to for the formal gender, the morphological gender of the noun. I mean, there are exceptions, but those are very few exceptions, and you know, in another lesson I can list them. But basically, if you have a school teacher, you call it, you know, in the feminine if it is a woman, and in the masculine if it is a man. And the problem is when you have a doctor, or if you have the director of the department and things like that. That's just a matter of culture. And in the culture, there, of course, in the last half of the century, you know, from the 70s on, I think there has been a proposal of, you know, using the feminine for all these languages. And then there is a different way of appreciation. So recently in France, there has been a lot of the Academy of the French language has protested against a school book that uses non-sexist language, because they were appalled by, you know, this splitting, you know, like girls and boys, you know, and these endings with asterisks or slashes, you know, they said this will ruin our language and all this. This shows, on the one hand, that the appreciation of non-sexist usage is very high, because we are having a press that is risking their money, you know, in making a book that is totally in favor of a non-sexist use of the language. And we have an academy that has not contributed to this. It is left, you know, aside, and is somehow protesting. And something similar has recently done the Spanish Academy. So politics has decided in France and in Spain to decline all feminine roles in the feminine, all women's roles in the feminine. And the academy, in Spain, actually, the academy was in favor. They don't like this splitting. In France, the academy is against. They like women, even singular women, to be called directeur, professeur, instead of directrice, professeur, something like this. So there are different cultural, you know, depreciation or appreciation. And well, of course, in a project like yours, I think you can build a common stand, right? Saying that there is, you know, there are languages that have this kind of structure, and we behave like this. And I can give you my opinion, of course. I mean, I think that one should never be too extreme. So splitting all the time is true. Splitting all the time is not elegant to see. Sometimes you just need to have a first line saying, from now on, when we say, you know, law student, we mean men and women. You know. But then if you have a woman who is invited to give a talk, for example, the University of Venice did a very strong affirmative action. If you go to our website, all our roles are in the gender of the person who has the role. So I am professoressa ordinaria, okay? And my director is a woman, and she's a direttrice del dipartimento. And from up down, you know, down to tecnica, it's called tecnica amministrativa, okay? Which was even not supposed to be in the ITC program we use, S3. They had to make something special to it. And that's the national way to, you know, the national ITC system. But then, you know, so this was a very strong action. It was taken after I gave a talk for some, you know, thing. I had invited the rector and the delegate to the rector's delegate to communication, and they, you know, they were sympathetic and they did it. This shows if you want to do it, you can do it. It took 1 month, nothing. Okay, I have been asking for this for 10 years. I've been the president. I was the president of the Equal Opportunity Committee for 5 years. The previous rector never listened to me, but even this rector was not so interested at some point. But then, you know, after that talk, for some reason, they thought it may be some, you know, an affirmative action, which, and this is true, does not do any harm. It costs nothing. You do it once and it's like this. But, and this is the most important but, there is no policy in doing all the documents like this. So they just did the website. And then when they invite a very distinguished professor, they call it professore, even if it is a woman. And, you know, and it's all like this. All the documents, it's the opposite of what Ferrara did. Ferrara hasn't changed their website. So they are all professores, they are women, but they somehow, in some sectors of the administration, have this affirmative action guideline. Okay, so I think one has to be, you know, it's not really cross-cultural. We have the same male chauvinist culture in Europe. It's exactly the same. There is not a difference, a very big difference in culture. There is a slightly different sensitivity to language. This is true. Germany is very advanced. So Merkel has never thought of being a chancellor. She, you know, she was. I don't think she's very feminist, or she's very leftist, this way of, right? But she made herself called Kanzlerin, so that's not a problem. There are many examples of Germans that believe that in Italian this is impossible, that you have to say this in the masculine because Italian is made like this, but these are not linguists, right? So if you have a linguist who tells you the system is the same, and what you can do in German, you can do in Italian, because the system is the same. The words are different, the declensions are different, but the system is the same. And then if out of this project you get also a, you know, good practices or some advices to universities. This policy has to be taken, I think, from the very early stages, because women, my colleagues, were angry that the director agreed with me to call them professoressa. They like to be called professore because professore is better. It's better than professoressa.
Interesting. Thank you.
Susan, are you only working on are you working specifically on language or on communication more broadly?
No, it's on developing waste strategies. But gender is one theme that runs through all the innovations that are being developed. And so I'm working with different partners to see how they can be as gender sensitive as possible. So language and communication comes into that. Okay,
yeah, sure. Because content-wise, there's probably larger room for a cross-cultural work without relying on comparative research, which is the case for linguistics instead. In that case, you probably need more.
You don't need a lot of research to show that you have a feminine masculine system relating to women. You just you know, it's not research. I mean, the point, the only way I can convince women, you know, to use a non-sexist use of language, to make a non-sexist use of language, is to show them how the Italian system really is. And this you show by looking at different noun categories referring to low-level roles. Mm-hmm. And that always decline for sex. Mm-hmm. For example, sometimes they say, well, this role is okay, it's a masculine, it's not important, it's the role, it's not the person. And then I say, would you call maestra or la babysitter if you had a male, if you had a young guy coming and being a babysitter for you, do you call it il babysitter or la babysitter? Because if babysitting is feminine, then you should say ambassador. This is very interesting. We have only, I think, one woman ambassador in Italy. Usually, ambasciatore is the ambassador, and ambasciatrice is the wife of the ambassador. Okay, and that's a role. That's a role, because being the wife of the ambassador is you go with the ambassador, you do things, right, in the foreign office ministry. And then I say, okay, good. So ambasciatore is also a woman. Then if gender on the noun is not meaningful, then you call ambasciatrice the husband of the woman ambassador. Mm-hmm. Can you do this? No. Mm-hmm. Okay, you can't do this. So it's not that the gender is related to the role, and the role, okay, is historically masculine, no problem. Because being the husband, the spouse of the ambassador, I imagine that the female ambassador has a husband, or I don't know this one, but we had, for example, the Nigerian woman ambassador, and she was in French l'ambassadrice. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. It was no problem. Okay, mm-hmm. So why should we translate l'ambassadrice as l'ambasciatore in Italian? I mean, they're both coming from Latin. Trix is Latin suffix. I mean, I think most of these people who resist have done a high-level school. They are academics, and so they can only be convinced by showing that that's how the language works, and that's just the use of language.
It's good to have the example in Italian. Thank you. I have to leave for another call now, but thank you very much for allowing me to participate.
Thanks a lot.
Hopefully in the next one. Bye. Bye.
Any other comments? We are approaching the closing time for this webinar. if anybody has any final issues or questions to raise.
Well, hi. Do you listen to me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, I'm Babis. I'm from BI Labs. A friend of mine texted me a question. She asked me to ask you your opinion on the, give me a second, on the Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls. It is written by two Italians, I think, and they have rewritten the fairy tales, excluding the stereotypes. And she asked me to ask you, what is your opinion on that? Maybe this is the way to start.
I couldn't get whether the question is from
your opinion. Actually, it's from a friend of mine.
Oh, from a friend of yours. Okay. Well, actually, I recently gave this book, bought this book for my daughter. I thought about it for a while. I knew one of the two co-founders in person because I've been meeting her in a Startup Europe project event, and she was, I mean, very fiercely advocating for the lack of women into digital entrepreneurship well before producing this book. But she's actually founding the Timbuktu Lab company in Silicon Valley together with another young Italian lady. So clearly there is overall, I have to say, I like the project. I think it's an interesting product, which is filling a gap in the editorial market in a way. It's very simple. There are actually several writers and writers, feminist writers for children, which have already started to counter stereotypes in literature for children. But this one is filling a particular gap in terms of the professional roles and which can be undertaken by women. It's a gallery of famous and less famous women from across the world. It gives also a well-balanced picture in terms of continents. It's not like ethnically white dominated, let's say. It represents women from all fields and disciplines, from rock music to sports to STEM to literature.
But why is it called the Rebel Women? Were they rebels?
Rebels in the sense that they challenged the stereotype, assuming that girls cannot make their own decisions, and I mean, a debate has been following the success of this book, which is now translated into many languages. Giuliana's comment actually made a point on what was the main core of the debate.
That's the problem. Women, in order for women to be equal, they have to be rebellious, and many people don't want to be rebellious. They just want to be peacefully, you know, taking their own roles. What I think what should be conveyed by maybe other literature is that, of course, you can be rebellious, but there is nothing strange. There is nothing rebellious if you want to be the director of a department, a university professor, or a woman in science. That's just normal. And so this is important. in a sense that our society doesn't need you to be rebellious. You shouldn't identify with just women who are nice to men, you know, only always with makeups and, you know, this is the problem, that in many cases we give to girls a male role which they want to take, and that's why they identify with men professionally, and with somehow, come si dice le velline in inglese? You know, these
the sexy showgirls.
Yeah, sexy showgirls humanly. So this creates a non-homogeneous identity, which I think is a problem in the woman professional work, because a woman is always trying to put together job and private life and the private self, and this is bad, because one should say that a woman has a private life like a man has a private life. So I think the other thing to work with is men. Men should go more at home, should stay more with their children, should be more important in the family, and should not be sanctioned if they don't work a lot in the professional side. So this is also some kind of narrative.
Just to close on this, my daughter, who is 9 years old, she totally fell in love with the book, and I think she read it in 2 afternoons. We were at the sea on holidays. But the important thing is that also my son, who is 6.5, started to read it and was very much inspired, and probably this is useful also for boys.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's even better. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Welcome. Okay, I think we can close the webinar, and the next one will be. There was one more slide, but okay. We will share the slides, so you can write to us if you would like to get it, at least for 4 months. And our next webinar will be focusing on how to engage young students from the high school, secondary schools, and how to work with them to raise their interest into STEM and ICT and information systems, which is something more, really relevant for the work our partners are doing. Thanks again for listening to us and for participating to this webinar, and just stay in touch via our website, mailing list, or social media channels. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.